Senator Cory of New Jersey. He's a key member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's also the author of a brand new New York Times bestseller entitled Stand. There you see the cover right there. We'll talk about that, Senator. Thanks so much for joining us. But according to the opening statement obtained by CNN, Pam Bondi tells lawmakers, and I'm quoting her now, justice and transparency in this matter have been delivered at the direction of President Trump and his administration. How do you respond to that, Senator?
I mean, that's a stunning misrepresentation of the facts. We know that this administration claimed that they wanted to be transparent and open, but yet during the entire time, not only were they not transparent, not open, we had to pass legislation, bipartisan legislation, forcing their hands. And even then, we didn't get all the documents. But what we did get, unfortunately, is a re-traumatizing of many of the victims. While they took great pains to redact the names of the people who could be responsible for these crimes, what they did often do is show names and pictures that, again, violated the privacy and the sanctity of those victims who've been suffering for far too long.
Presumably more questions will be asked of Pam Bondi during the course of this interview. On another story, an important story we've been following, U.S. officials now say the U.S. and Iran have reached what they describe as a tentative agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to begin talks on the nuclear program in Iran. President Trump is in the Situation Room right now, we're told, to make, what I'm quoting now, a final determination on the deal. The president also posted that the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports will, quote, now be lifted. What's your response to these latest developments?
Well, again, we've seen misdirection and outright lies from the administration for a long time. And this deal that they're saying is not a conclusion of the crisis that Donald Trump plunged us in. It's actually a furthering of the disgrace. Because what Donald Trump is doing right now is trying to claw back and just get back to the point we were before this whole crisis started. But the damage is done. The regime is more extreme, not less. The regime still has their highly enriched uranium, and he has no plan to get it out. He said that that was going to be part of further discussions. What this is just about is the Strait of Hormuz, which was not closed before this all began. And my worry here is that this Iranian regime, because of this opening, is going to be able to receive billions of dollars in oil money that they're going to use to further their low-cost drones that are still plaguing the area, funding of their proxies that are doing terrorist activities throughout the Middle East and endangering Americans, and ultimately strengthening them to continue to resist what, frankly, we should have been continuing to do with the Iran deal that Obama made. So this is a president that this is shameful, he is failing, and this is no great deal. It's a furtherance of the disaster that he created.
Trump just posted on Truth Social, and I'm just going to read the first two sentences for you and get your reaction, Senator. Iran must agree that they will never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. The Hormuz Strait must be immediately open, no tolls for unrestricted shipping traffic in both directions. All water mines, bombs, if any, will be terminated. And then he goes on to explain some more. If all this happens, will you support this agreement?
Well, remember, this is my first point. Before he took office, the Strait of Hormuz was open. There was a deal in place in which they pledged never to have a nuclear weapon. We had insight into their milling, their mining, cameras, and spot inspections to ensure that that commitment they made wasn't there. You had a leader in place that created a fatwa against ever having a nuclear weapon. Well, Donald Trump took all of that and blew it up. And we are now in a situation where he's trying to scramble to get back to where we were before he was president. So again, I don't believe him that there's some kind of great bargain that's going to end this war. That's why I'm going to continue to fight in the United States Senate to force these war power resolutions, because right now we are still in crisis. We weren't in crisis before he was president, a crisis of his creation. And most perhaps painful is that every American is paying the cost for his incredible disaster at the pump, with higher prices, and really with the pain that their families are facing economically.
Senator, I want to turn to the truly boiling tensions right now between ICE agents and protesters just outside of the Delaney Hall Immigration Detention Center in your home state of New Jersey. You're among several lawmakers who actually made it inside that facility for an oversight visit amid deep concerns about conditions there. The New Jersey Governor, Mikey Sherrill, was among those not even allowed to enter that facility. So what specifically did you observe when you were inside?
I observed conditions that are an affront, not just to the dignity of the people that are in there, but to our common dignity and sense of decency. I saw more of Donald Trump's immigration policies that are cruel, that even the right-wing Cato Institute has called them out for its hypocrisy, that they are locking people up that did not commit crimes, that are no threat. Many of them have been in this country not just years, but decades. And so I talked to those people that have American children and even grandchildren, people who have committed no crimes and were trying to comply with immigration laws but got rounded up, many of them as their paperwork was still in process. This is a level of cruelty that's unacceptable, and the conditions there are an affront to human dignity. And finally, it's all being done by a private for-profit prison that we are paying over $1 billion to, over $1 billion to people who are profiting off of the pain that they're causing. They're making money off of the misery that they're inflicting. This is a facility that should be closed and should not exist. It's a moral stain on our nation.
I know, Senator, you've repeatedly called for this facility to be closed, and you've pointed out several times that many of the detainees there do not have any criminal histories. But the Trump administration argues that if these individuals actually are in the United States illegally, if they enter the country illegally, that they have committed a crime. So to be clear, Senator, do you believe these detainees should immediately be released?
Again, that's a holistic statement. What I'm saying is what the Cato Institute has said is only about 5% of the people that they're rounding up from our streets and from our communities have committed any crimes. Donald Trump said he was going to go after the most dangerous of dangerous people, and he has taken resources, our taxpayer dollars, away from the ATF, away from the FBI, who are investigating serious crimes. Remember, the #1 killer of our children is gun violence, but yet he has focused this on and overwhelmingly locking up people that pose no threat. And many of them are very integral parts of the fabric of our communities. So this is disastrous. It's morally wrong. It's not making us safe. In fact, it's making us less safe. And so, yes, I believe there are people in there that are wasting taxpayer dollars and making this private corporation that has showered the Trump and Republicans with campaign contributions. It's making them rich and all of us less safe and more poor.
While I have you, Senator, a quick turn to politics. I want to play what the former First Lady Jill Biden said in a recent interview about President Biden's now infamous 2024 presidential debate performance. It was against then candidate Donald Trump. Watch and listen to this.
Were you horrified as you saw it unfold?
I wasn't horrified, I was frightened, because I had never, ever seen Joe like that before or since. Never.
Or since?
Yes, or
You've
since.
never seen him like
Never.
that?
No.
What happened?
I don't know what happened. I mean, as I watched it, I thought, oh my God, he's having a stroke. And it scared me to death.
What went through your mind, Senator, when you heard that?
You know, as I'm dealing with the Delaney crisis, the Delaney Hall crisis, as I'm dealing with a war that this president started, as we're dealing with the pain that New Jerseyans across my state tell me about higher costs, God bless the Bidens. They were in office over 18 months ago. That was over 2 years ago. I hope there's an accounting for everything that happened. But right now, I'm in the huddle. We have serious challenges before us. We need to fight forward and not dwell in what happened 2 years ago. I know that Donald Trump would love to be talking about Joe Biden. He can't stop talking about Joe Biden. But I'm concerned about the people of New Jersey who are getting screwed by this president, who are losing their health care by the hundreds of thousands, who are seeing their costs go up collectively, paying hundreds of millions of dollars more just for gas. We have issues to deal with today, and let there be accounting of what happened in the past some other time. But there are real crises that the president himself has caused that we should be dealing with.
Important point. The account from the former First Lady stands in sharp contrast to what she said publicly about President Biden at the time, back in 2024. And your new book, and here it is, here's the cover, here's the book, excellent new book, very powerful, entitled Stand, is all about using challenging times in our nation's history to push the country forward. Are these latest comments from Jill Biden productive in doing that for Democrats?
You know, I'm really happy that Doris Kearns Goodwin and John Meacham and Henry Louis Gates, historians, wrote blurbs and support for the book, because it goes to the moments in history where what mattered was not who the president was or who the senator was, but how Americans, through exercising the best of who we are, dealt with the worst of times. This book was meant to be an answer to people's questions. What can I do in a time of crisis in my country? This book, to me, is not just inspiration, it is really instruction. And so I am one of those Democrats that is tired of my party's failures in moments of crisis. There are so many great leaders, and I'm not painting with a broad brush. But I think what Americans are demanding right now is for leaders to stand up, not just what they're against, but to begin to talk about what they are for. And that's what I wanted to write a book about, that calls from our history to point to who we can be in the future, and ultimately talks specifically about how we can get there together.
Yeah, it's really an important book, and I've gone through it and learned a lot reading this book entitled Stand. There it is right there. All right, Senator Cory Booker, thanks for joining us. Thanks for writing this important book. We'll all learn a lot from the history that you share with our viewers and people who read this book. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Wolf.